Esse é o podcast Inteligência Jurídica, o espaço do Machado Meyer pensado para dividir com você a nossa visão sobre questões que impactam seus negócios e transformam realidades.
Hello, welcome to one more episode of our series Energy Transition. We are very glad to have you all listening to us, and today will be a little bit different. We'll be doing this in English, so our friends from overseas or friends who live in Brazil and don't speak Portuguese can get what we are trying to convey here. And the idea is that we will cover the whole energy sector here, meaning power, oil and gas, and give you a very small but hopefully interesting overview of what's going on here in Brazil. To start that, I'm very happy to have here a good friend and my partner, José Virgílio Enei. And Virgílio, let's just jump in and start, okay? Virgílio, talking about energy transition in Brazil, obviously we have to mention that the renewable industry in Brazil, in particular wind and solar, are very strong. We have a mature industry, plus 20 years since Proinfa, etc. But I think it would be interesting if you can share with our people here, our listeners, what else besides solar and wind we've been seeing in the market and the projects we are working, what other types of renewable sources, and most importantly, if you have to give your overview of the next 5 to 10 years, what kind of new projects in the renewable sector you think we will have here in Brazil?
Thank you for the question, Daniel. I think it's a good opportunity to talk about new technologies and new frontiers in the power generation. I think in Brazil, we should talk about offshore wind. Brazil has huge potential in offshore wind. Suffice to say that we have a long coast, 7,500 kilometers, and a 200-mile of the economic zone where these projects could be located. This offers a huge potential for these projects in Brazil. We've seen a lot of interest from investors recently, but we have not yet completed the first project in Brazil. In worldwide, as you know, this is already a reality. Last year, China made a record of 17,000 mega of offshore wind projects, and we are working to get our first project done. The challenge at this moment is to overcome the regulation, the bureaucracy in Brazil, which is not simple. Brazil government doesn't have the experience on these projects. We have a decree that is going to come into effect anytime soon, and then we'll need some further regulations. And that's the discussion we are currently having with our clients and with investors. But with so many interests, just a matter of time for this to become a reality in Brazil. The interesting about offshore wind is that it offers opportunities for very large projects as opposed to the traditional onshore wind. So projects can be conceived and implemented with 1,000, 5,000 megawatts in a single complex, and that obviously offers a very great source of energy. And the offshore wind also may lead the way to other technologies. For instance, the generation of electricity offshore may offer the opportunity for that electricity to be used to produce the green hydrogen, which then can be transported and sold to not only in Brazil, but to other markets. Very good, a very efficient source of energy, especially in these times after the Ukraine war and the need to rethink the power in the world.
Thanks. And obviously there's a big expectation for both of them, since when you go to the global arena, that's certainly offshore wind and hydrogen are two very important sources looking forward for the transition. Now, before we move on to gas, let's take advantage of your experience and tackle the issue of legal stability or legal security, which we know that every investor looking to Brazil has. Now, obviously, you have 30 plus years working in the industry. I'm guessing, and I know you've seen so many cycles and so many risks that were raised and I guess later on worked out. But recently we had at least two very important cases, one in our Supreme Court regarding the indirect transfer of concession contracts, and now more recently, this decree from Congress aiming to suspend the inflation adjustment of distribution companies. Can you share with our audience your view on legal stability and the sanctity of contracts in Brazil in the energy sector?
Sure, Daniel. When we look back 30 years ago, when Brazil was starting its first privatization movement in the 90s, and we compare to the reality we have today, it's clear that Brazil changed substantially in the right direction. And I'm also convinced that Brazil will continue to move in the right direction in the future to have a stronger stability and better legal framework for investments in infrastructure and other sectors in Brazil. But when you look into the short term, that's not the ideal, but the situation we have in Brazil is a lot of bumps ahead, surprises, as the one we are experiencing right now. We had as you mentioned, the decision of the Supreme Court on the matter of whether concessions could be transferred or their control could be transferred. Obviously, this was a discussion that by itself, the very existence of this discussion was something that scared a lot local and foreign investors. But at the end of the day, after long debates, a good decision was provided, and that corroborated the stability of the system into the right direction. We are right now discussing this possibility of suspension, postponing of indexation of contracts, which would amount to a deviation on the terms that were originally agreed by the investors. We've seen that many other times. It may take some time for that to be corrected, but based on experience, we are convinced that this will be corrected and those contracts will prevail at the end. Hopefully, Brazil will learn to protect the stability, the legal framework, even in the short term, so that we don't have these surprises along the way, we don't have step backs. But that's a process. I think we are learning, and experience shows that no matter what president we may have, no matter what party is in power, the system, the institutions are strong, and at the end of the day, contracts are upheld in Brazil.
Yeah, that will certainly be great with the short term, but I think it's already nice to know that we are a long-term industry. So in the long run, those contracts being kept, it's already great. Now let's move to gas. I'm very happy that Maria Fernanda was also able to join. And Fernanda, on the global scene, it's very well known that gas is seen as the transition fuel, because within the carbon-based fuel sources, it's the one with the smaller footprint. But as we move to Brazil, we know there are other strategic reasons why gas is so important, starting with the fact that most of our oil production, in particular the pre-salt, is associated with gas, but also the role that the gas has in supplying energy to our industry, to our plants, and also very importantly, it's the main fuel for thermal power plants, which in its turn is essential to the security of the power system. Now, I think it's important that you share with our audience where we are in terms of opening the gas market. I assume by now most people that look into Brazil know that we've been in this process for a few years. So it would be nice if you could share what's already been done. And a question we get a lot from investors, whether it's already at a stage that it can no longer be reversed, or do we still have the risk that different approach by the regulators or Congress would put us back where we were before we started this whole opening movement?
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here. So when we talk about the gas market in Brazil, I think the first thing we have to mention is the new gas law and the new gas decree that came as a result of long years of discussions to review the legal framework in this industry. And we had, together with the discussions of the new gas law and gas decree, we had the discussions of the new gas market program, which was the new version of the gas to growth program. And by its turn, it came as a result of the decision that Petrobras took a few years ago to walk away from the gas industry and to just keep certain strategic assets in this industry. So there is an opening in the industry, and new activities, new business models are becoming a reality in Brazil, where in the past, some activities were all inside the same agent. Now they are becoming independent business models to be explored in the industry. And together with that, we are seeing a booming in the industry with new agents looking for new opportunities. And I can have as an example, I can tell you, looking at the gas chain from a physical perspective, I can say that producers, which traditionally were selling gas to Petrobras, they are looking for new markets to put this gas. So they are having access to important infrastructures that otherwise or in the past was not opening for them. So third-party access to gathering pipeline processing facilities is now a reality in Brazil. And transporters, which are called the transmission operators abroad, they are offering different types of capacity products to the market. So the transportation of gas, seen as an important role to develop a gas hub in Brazil, is now starting to deliver the first results. There are many new shippers hiring capacity in the transmission operators in Brazil because they have new gas supply agreements with new consumers. So this is a good thing also. And potential free market consumers are looking for new sources of supply. So this is also creating opportunity to gas traders and other agents that are looking for new business and new opportunities to put the gas in the market. And we are seeing also distribution companies starting to get ready to provide different types of distribution services, which are not a reality in the past in Brazil. So they are also developing the new models of which I can say the transportation inside local states, which is called the distribution services in Brazil. So basically in the entire chain, many agents are looking for new opportunities, and they're starting to happen with the enactment of the new gas law. Construction of new pipelines is also in the pipeline for the future. So many different activities across the entire gas chain are becoming a reality now with the enactment of the new gas law. And there are many challenges ahead, but we are seeing concrete facts and concrete new business becoming true in the present moment.
I'm convinced, I hope our audience is as well, that it's definitely a reality, and what we are seeing now and should see in the future is much more a development of the things you said rather than a discussion whether we should or not open the market. Let's move to oil, and some people could think, well, if we're talking about energy transition, why are we discussing oil in the first place? Sure, some of you have witnessed discussions with very harsh ideas on what should be done in terms of the oil production, including ideas to cut everything right now. And obviously, most of these discussions prior to the Russia-Ukraine war, I guess, were sort of more appealing to some people in terms of it's a must-do. But obviously now, with everything that's going on in Europe, but also globally, it's very easy to see that the importance that oil still has in our lives and in the global economy. Now, looking into Brazil, I'm very happy to have here Fernando Xavier to share with the audience. What do you think, Fernando, would be the impact of these discussions in energy transition and security of supply when we look at our oil industry with everything which is going on here in terms of increasing production in the pre-salt and Brazil as a whole, but also new markets such as the onshore market? What do you think should be the outcome for Brazil in terms of the oil market? And obviously, if you could also say, how do you think Brazil will be in the global panel of large producers for the next 5-10 years? I'm sure our audience would appreciate that. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Daniel. Let me say that I'm very happy to talk about oil. This is a subject that I'm not ashamed of saying that I'm an oil guy. And I think that at this point in time, there is a shock of reality, a global shock of reality that is proving that oil will be in place for not only many years, but probably for many generations. It is not a relay race. It's not like one energy source will pass will transition to the other energy as in a short period. It's actually a transition, a long-term transition where the different sources of energy will be in place for many years in different contexts, in different countries and different realities. And I think that Brazil needs to understand exactly what kind of reality and context that we are facing. So we do not simply import and reproduce the lessons that other countries have learned, but we have to learn our own lessons. But initially, when we talk about the role that oil will play on the energy transition, I would like to talk more. I would like to subvert a little bit the question. I would like to talk about the fact that oil has a leading role by itself, by its own right. Oil has, let's say, more than 100 years ago, oil has played a central role on its own energy transition, its own energy revolution. Let's remember that when the oil industry started many decades ago, it represented for the humanity a change from millennia of primary energy sources. We're talking about firewood, we're talking about animal or plant-based oils that have been used for centuries. And oil, the oil revolution together with the industrial revolution has led the humanity to the modernity that we are living today, to the level of comfort that we are having today. We're talking about plastics, we're talking about automobile, asphalt, chemicals. So basically, in summary, we're talking about modernity. We're talking about the level of comfort that nobody is willing to abdicate, even for a very good cause as energy transition. Before I continue, let me just do 2 disclaimers. Without that, I think that people might think that we are extremists. I'm not an extremist. I'm not denying 2 specific things. I'm not denying climate change. It's a reality. We need to work on that, and we need to have people and governments and society working strong on that. The second thing is that we really need to look to invest on new technologies. As Virgílio said, we need to invest on transition technologies, as Maria Fernanda said. So this is an imperative. There's no doubt on that. So after doing these disclaimers, let me go back to oil. The thing about oil is that we are not able to talk about energy transition. We are not able to talk about changing the energy matrix of any country without having a key concept, which is energy security. So energy security is the key concept that we should have in mind. And that connects to the fact that, as I said, nobody is willing to abdicate from the level of comfort, from the level of modernity that we have achieved. And this is imperative. So the reality is that, and we need to work on the reality. We cannot work on ideology, pure ideology or good willingness. Any radical movement in the direction of interrupting investments in oil anywhere in the world will lead to disruption and sometimes very severe disruptions, especially on more fragile economies and communities than in more developed communities. So we are seeing that. We're seeing that happening right now. We are seeing how the disruption caused by the war in Ukraine is causing shortages in many countries. You're seeing the rise in the fuel prices. And we know how much this is a sensitive matter for especially poor communities more than developed countries and rich communities. So it's really good to know that there are people and there are societies willing to invest more and pay more for new alternative types of energy. And I think this will pave the way for these energies to take place and be more cost effective in the future. But right now, we need to be very careful when we're talking about big disruptions. That's not how things happen. And sometimes this is a very simplistic way of seeing things and ignoring the impact that such disruptions could have on more fragile communities. But okay, let's go back to Brazil. Brazil has a very diversified energy matrix. There's no doubt on that. Brazil has hydropower, solar, eolic with an incredible role in the country. The last two, solar and eolic, have represented a revolution by themselves. And when you think about how Brazil was 20 or 30 years ago, it's really, really astonishing how much we have achieved. And at the same time, we're talking about a country with an oil industry, which is a global reference. The Brazilian oil industry is really, you talk about the Brazil entering into the list of top producers in the world. Brazil is in the list of top producers, at least for 10 years. We are, if not 8 or 9 in the world and growing. And what is exactly the role that Brazil might have in terms of oil, but also in terms of energy transition? The fact that we have this, at the same time, the availability of new sources. We have the availability of hydropower, of solar, of eolic, and also of biofuels, means that we don't have the kind of pressure that countries like the US will have on having to be a net importer of oil. We can use the oil industry in Brazil as a source of resources to finance the energy transition on a long-term plan. We can also show the world that we can make this blend of different generations of energy sources living together, and even the oil industry financing the energy transition. So in Brazil, I would like just to highlight quickly, today we have a very different situation as we have when comparing to what we have 10 or 20 years ago. When the oil market was really dominated by Petrobras, we are seeing the conclusion of a long-term process of changing the basis, the fundamentals of that market and that industry. We are seeing onshore industry, exploration production industry that has been reinvented from zero, from scratch. And we're seeing, at least in the last 2 or 3 years, the arrival of many companies that were unthinkable a few years ago. On the shallow water, we are also seeing something similar, but on a small scale. Offshore, we see this big, giant oil field provinces like the pre-salt, but also we are seeing the potential of new frontier basins, ultra deep water basins like the Sergipe Alagoas, and also the potential of the Ceará and the Amazon basin, which have the potential to be the new pre-salt for the next 5 or 10 years. So Brazil has this incredible capability of increasing production in the short term, but also ensuring that you have replacement of portfolio for the medium long term. And also we have the mature industry in Brazil, which was inexistent. It didn't exist a few years ago, and now we are seeing investments going to this industry that has been playing a leading role on the North Sea, on the US, and many other economies that have been for many decades investing on the oil industry. So we see these 3 different industries in Brazil arising very strongly and opening opportunities for any company willing to invest, together with a very strong democracy, with rule of law, and also availability of G&G data, which is not easy and plays a big role on allowing companies to enter in Brazil, the risk in geological insecurity. So everything together, the diversified energy matrix of Brazil, the capacity of the country, geological capacity of the country, and legal capacity of the country to attract investments to the oil industry and generate opportunities, for me means that Brazil might be the reliable source of energy in the world, as Brazil is now in terms of food. We can be in terms of energy, oil for sure, but also other kinds of fuels. For example, biofuels. And I would like to repeat what I said in the beginning. We should not import other ways of doing the energy transition. We should not consider that Brazil is California or Denmark. Brazil is Brazil, and Brazil has its own vocation. So I think that for Brazil, oil will play a leading role on its own right for the next at least 3 decades, if not more. Biofuels should be the next protagonist that will replace oil, naturally replace oil. And the other renewable sources will be the basis for everything to happen, because that will provide Brazil with the kind of energy security. As I said, the key concept is energy security. And that other energy sources like hydropower, solar, and wind will provide Brazil with the kind of basis for us to continue investing and assuming this protagonist role in the world. So for me, that's the role of Brazil in the world.
Thank you, Fernando. And it's a very complete overview. And I guess trying to just bring closure to that will be some of the words that we use, right? I think the energy transition discussion should always remember that there is a word transition there. So nothing happens abruptly. I think a fair transition is also an important point, given that Brazil is an emerging market, but in the reality, there are a lot of people and regions that do not really have access to energy and sources of supply. Now we're getting towards the very end of our episode here, and I would provoke you to give our audience in 30 seconds quick tips about investment opportunities in the segments that you've covered. So we'll start again with Virgílio. Just mention a couple of opportunities that you see in the future to invest in the power segment.
Sure, Daniel. We talked about the huge potential of offshore wind, so that's certainly an area where investors could look into, but not in the very short term, because as I mentioned, we still need to sort out the bureaucracy and get the first project implemented so that we can open the opportunity for other investors in a clear path towards implementation. But an opportunity that we have there, and jumping to a different type of investment, would be Eletrobras. We've finally overcame the discussions at the Brazilian Auditing Court, the Tribunal de Contas da União, and it's just a matter of time for the privatization to be a reality, and we have the offering of Eletrobras shares in the market in a way that would dilute the federal government, currently the majority controlling shareholder, to a minority shareholder. That will certainly open huge opportunities for investment in Eletrobras, and for Eletrobras to materialize its potential with new projects and thinking in a more rational and market-oriented manner.
Great, wonderful. Maria Fernanda, what about gas?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, and Fernando also brought in his speech the discussion about the biofuels. I think the biogas is a very good opportunity in the future in Brazil. It's a fuel that can use all the gas infrastructure that's already in place, and it reaches distant locations which are not traditionally, which has no access traditionally to the closer areas where the oil production and gas productions are located in Brazil. So it has a very good reach in Brazil. LNG projects are coming true also in Brazil. There are 3 new LNG projects that are becoming operational in the next few years, aside from 2 of them that are already operating in Brazil. But I think what we don't have yet is liquefaction projects in Brazil that could also help for the gas to reach these distant locations where the economics are good for that. And also, I would say the LDCs, I think there are a few privatizations in the future in the pipeline. So I think investing in LDCs in Brazil is also a very good opportunity of businesses.
Perfect. So very happy to finish up our episode in such a positive tone. Thank you for the three of you for coming, and for you in the audience, thanks so much for following the podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode.
Você ouviu o podcast Inteligência Jurídica, o espaço de encontro para dividirmos com você a nossa visão sobre as questões que impactam os seus negócios.